Hey, noble one, so good to see you here. Look what I found. English longbowman medieval archer from Simple History. 1.1 million views. Holy moly. Are you into the English bow? I know I am. Let's check this out.
Men at arms. The English longbowmen. 14th to the 16th century.
Men at arms and longbowmen are two different things, but yeah.
Though the bow has been used in warfare for thousands of years, it was not until the 14th century, with the appearance of the longbow, did it become for a while the supreme and dominant force on the battlefield of Europe.
Okay, so let me give them a positive note and a little bit of a pedantic note because I'm Mr. Pedantic. So I do like how they represented the bows, also because they're not putting the little handle that everyone does. Given it would have been nice if they were naturally laminated in the sense that they would be split into different colors, one representing the hardwood and one representing the sapwood. I'll tell you more about that in a second. Still, I give them props for that. Did he say the longbow was created? Let me see.
Become for a while the supreme and dominant...
Oh, actually they did put... Yeah, here though they did put the little handle that is not supposed to be there. At least as far as I know. I mean, I looked through a lot of iconography. Never seen it. Maybe today we'll find it and I can debunk myself.
...has been used in warfare for thousands of years. It was not until the 14th century, with the appearance of the longbow, did it become...
Yeah, that's what I mean. They says the appearance of the longbow in the 14th century. No, the longbow has existed for a longer, definitely longer period, even end of the Roman period, very, very beginning of the early Middle Ages, there were already longbows, given they weren't as powerful as they say 15th century Melrose bows, 120 to 140 pounds of draw weight, but still they were technically longbows.
For a while the supreme and dominant force on the battlefield of Europe, especially in the hands of the English and their Welsh subjects. Of particular skill were men from Wales and Cheshire, regions that became synonymous with the English longbow.
That is actually a little bit of a myth in the sense that did the Welsh have longbowmen? Yes, I would say so. Were they synonymous with longbowmen, or were they particularly efficient? Were they the originators of the longbow? I don't believe so. I don't think there is, like, there are mentions of the Welsh using powerful bows, even against the Normans. We don't know if that means longbow, by the way, but still, it's possible. With that being said, I don't think there is, it's a little bit of a half myth, this fixation with the Welsh. Also because even the wood wasn't Welsh. The wood was Italian, mostly, and Spanish, but Italian. The wood that was used in England and Wales for producing these bows was from the Alps in Italy.
The simple design consisted of a slightly curved bow made of wood that was as tall as a man and had incredible range, power.
Sometimes it's even taller than a man.
And accuracy.
Correct.
To use it took practice and skill, as well as great strength, as the bowstring had to be pulled back over 30 inches when firing it.
That is correct, yes. In fact, the ideal way is to be able to pull it all the way back to your ear. That's what makes you a medieval archer.
They were made from a single piece of yew tree branch. It took months or even years to produce one, as it had to be dried and then worked into the correct shape, slowly.
You know, this is kind of strange to say, because I would say that longbows were actually, it didn't take years to make a longbow. They could be mass-produced relatively quickly. Also, was it made from yew? Sometimes yes, other times elm, other times ash. Yeah, all three were used.
Over time. Cheaper versions of the longbow were also crafted, but were made from inferior materials and were therefore much faster to construct. But they tended to quickly distort, which caused them to become inaccurate, and they swiftly broke apart. Most of the time, English archers were not operating as a soldier, so they used their longbows to hunt with and provide food for their family. Most saw it as a wise investment to buy the best quality longbow that they could find.
A little specification here. Hunters, true. But in general in England, depending on the period, there was a law that said that every abled male from the age of 16 to 60 was required to practice with the longbow. So not every one of those would have been a hunter, but every one of those would have been a proficient archer. So that's what made England special, if you will, when it comes to longbow and archers and longbow warfare. But there were a lot of other countries that used longbows all over, including in continental Europe. Although then again, you also had crossbow countries. So countries that mostly focused on crossbowmen. It doesn't mean that they never deployed archers, just means that they focused on crossbowmen, such as, for instance, of course, the Genoese from the Republic, from Genoa, Czech, the Kingdom of Bohemia was another crossbow country, which is why I was so upset with Kingdom Come Deliverance 1 that didn't feature crossbows, and I was very happy with Kingdom Come Deliverance 2, which does feature crossbows.
The longbow needed extensive training to use, and this was part of the reason it was not widely adopted across Europe.
Oh, wait. Yes, it was widely adopted. Oh my gosh, what is he talking about? I just did this. No, it was widely adopted across Europe. It's just that the English were particularly good at it and could draw higher poundage bows. So they were better archers, and because then more in the population were strong enough to be able to draw even more powerful bows. But no, longbows were a thing all over Europe.
And recognized the true value of the weapon, passing laws encouraging regular archery practice, and even put in place taxation to help with the funding of the special wood needed to make them.
Correct.
To show the importance the English placed on the military value of the longbow, at its peak during the medieval era, it was typical that an English army would be made up of over half its number in longbowmen.
And more than that if you look at 1415 at Battle of Agincourt.
The longbow was accurate up to about 250 feet, but in good conditions and fired by experienced archers, an arrow could reach a range of nearly 1,000 feet. Though accuracy was only effective if fired en masse at these kinds of distances.
Okay, I know what you're thinking. I know, because you call me pedantic, but you're pedantic too. You are there typing saying, he said fired, there is no fire involved. So I'm voicing you right now. Don't you dare call me pedantic. I'm voicing you. You all thought it, and you know that. You know it. Tell me I'm wrong in the comments. You thought it. Also, accuracy is also another thing, because usually longbowmen in an English way, but in general in the medieval way, they're precision shooters. A lot of the times when we look at iconography, you can tell that they are aiming, they're shooting a point blank, and they're not like, oh, let's throw as many random arrows into the mix and hope for the best from an enormous distance. Occasionally that did happen, but in general, an archer, I would say by default, is a precision striker. We could put it this way.
When used in a large formation of rank upon rank of longbowmen, they could be a devastating and effective force, as proved at Crécy in 1346 and again at Agincourt in 1415, where both times the English heavily defeated the French by firing massive volleys of arrows in coordinated unison. It was found that the best tactic suited to using these kinds of archers was to deploy them in large groups and use them like artillery, pounding the advancing enemy with wave after wave of arrows raining down on them from high above. In some situations, longbowmen were able to fire between 3 to 6 arrows per minute and were often given between 60 and 72 arrows for the duration of the battle. However, this would require a large level of physical exertion, and archers would rarely attempt this firing rate. In contrast, the crossbow, favored by a lot of European armies, could only fire at a fraction of this rate.
Continental. Also, I would say there is a response to that in the sense that it's true that the rate of fire is higher with archers when compared to a single crossbowman, but oftentimes if you look at professional crossbowmen, like such as for example the Genoese crossbowmen, then you have a reloader. So in other words, your rate of fire can be increased and sped up when you're using a crossbow, because by the time you have shot your crossbow, the reloader has reloaded the other crossbow, passes you the second crossbow, and while they reload that, you have one ready to shoot and you shoot again. It's a little retinue, if you will. So that needs to be taken into consideration, the way these weapons were tactically used, particularly by professionals. So there is that. And yeah, there are a lot of pros and cons, advantages and disadvantages. Of course, the crossbow relies on the strength of the weapon to create the poundage needed for penetration and maximum damage output, whereas the bow uses strength of the bowmen. So but what that means is that it translates to the fact that yes, you may have a higher rate of fire, as you were saying, but you do need many years to train a longbowman, and you can effectively train a crossbowman in a matter of weeks. Between 2 to 4, in fact, would be standard in Europe. So I would say there are pros and cons, but when we look at the rate of fire as one of the pros of the longbow, do keep in mind that there are ways to reduce that difference between a crossbow and how many times per minute you can shoot, and a longbow and how many times per minute you can shoot. Not to mention, a lot of the times it's better to be tactical with your shots.
Archers were vulnerable to hand-to-hand combat, as they were lightly armed and armored. To counter this, they would be placed behind a defensive line of infantry, or a natural defensive geographical feature like a slope or purpose-built ditches.
Right.
At first, longbowmen were using the highly...
Man, the ditches man will be proud of this statement. Yes, or even stakes like they were showing, something like this was used. It usually was to counter cavalry, though. When it comes to hand-to-hand combat, archers could do that pretty well. And often archers are decently armored. Once again, it's anecdotal, as I was saying, because it depends on the army we are examining. Some armies would equip them better than others, but in general, it's not like... Because oftentimes in video games, if the infantry impacts the archers are butchered. But in reality, well, it depends. What type of infantry is it? Archers could very well be armored. You can. But the only thing you wouldn't be wearing is a pair of gauntlets as an archer. But you can wear full plate arms and still operate a bow perfectly. You could wear a brigandine. You can wear mail and even a certain degree of plate and still operate as an effective archer. You want to have a good vision, so... You wouldn't be wearing an armet as an archer, not that I can see, but you could be wearing a salet, you can wear a kettle hat, you can still be well armored, and you can wear a sword and a buckler, for instance, or a sword and a shield, and still basically operate as medium, at least medium infantry. So sure, against full plate knights, I mean, you'll do what you can, but against other infantry, the level is not that different like we see in video games. So archers can still function as infantry if needed. And do remember that these guys are strong physically. Aha, arrowhead. Let's see. So we're going to talk about the bodkin.
Broadhead arrows. But over time, these units needed something cheaper and able to counter the trend of medieval infantry becoming better armored, especially knights. So they started to use heavy bodkin
and metatrons
and arrowheads on the shafts, which were chisel-shaped and less costly to produce, which was the medieval equivalent of an armor-piercing round.
I like
that. The plate armor that knights used was still hard to penetrate.
Yep.
By the 16th century, the longbow had well and truly had its day, as ever-improving muskets and cannons were now starting to dominate the battlefield.
So he used the word musket, and some of you may be annoyed by that. In reality, we can't be too pedantic about this one, because when you say musket, you can mean it in two different ways. You can identify with the word musket the type of early modern weaponry that is like after the arquebus. So the arquebus in early firearms used in the late Middle Ages, and then you evolve into like 1740s, 1750s, and you imagine that type of musket. But in reality, the first usage historical of the word musket was not to mean what we usually think of a musket, but was to mean a very heavy and sometimes double weight arquebus that was used not only in the very late Middle Ages, but in the immediately, in the Renaissance or very beginning of the early modern period. So I'm not going to be too pedantic on him using the word musket. In that case, for his conclusion.
By the 16th century, the longbow had well and truly had its day, as ever-improving muskets and cannons were now starting to dominate the battlefield.
No, in general, 16th century firearms don't completely replace and remove archers. You just have gunners deployed together with archers, together with infantry, together with cavalry, and then you have pike and shot and that sort of situation. But the archers are not gone by the 16th century by any stretch of imagination. It's possible that I'm misunderstanding him though here, because the statement wasn't as clear as one would want it to be. Anyways, then he's going to give us his conclusion. Maybe you could check out the video for the conclusion yourself. But I want to say once again, when you represent a medieval longbow, due to the way it was constructed, which was to cut a single, as they say, cut a single section of the tree, but do so in a way that you will get a natural lamination, because you will cut in that intersection that's a naturally occurring intersection within the inside of the wood, where you have both hardwood and sapwood, and that creates a natural lamination. I'm not aware of artificial lamination in medieval Europe, and that people start to experiment with that. So actually putting two separate cuts of wood together and laminate them artificially, that happens in the early modern period. But I do not believe it happened in the Middle Ages. Regardless, I hope you enjoyed this video, and I hope I wasn't too pedantic for you. You and I know that that's an impossibility. Thank you very much for watching. See you tomorrow.